There we go. We're on. Hey, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Sandy Abramson back with another Monday leadership. So, we're going to spend a few minutes here. We've been doing this over the last few months, just for a few minutes on Monday. Take some time, jump on, talk about some of the things that are we're talking about with leaders, ways that we can pass along frameworks and things to help along the way as you lead your college and young adult ministry. So it's been fun just to hear some of the feedback, the comments from these Monday lives. And so obviously we'd love to have you here. If you can jump on with us at 11 a.m. Central Time. You can figure out what that looks like for you if you're in a different time zone, but also we do record all of these in Circle or post the replays to Circle as well. And so we're going to jump in today as we're going to continue our conversation. If you remember last week, we spent some time asking the question, are we measuring the right things? Right, of beginning to ask the question, okay, is it just simply metrics that we are measuring, right? Is it attendance? Is it finances? Like it's easy to begin to take some of that data that's easily able to be observed, but it's a little bit harder to go into formation, right? And so what we want to do today is we want to talk, kind of jump off into that conversation we mentioned last week, just about really the change that we want to see, or the measurement that we want to see in the lives of our ministries, of the people in our ministry, is really around transformation, really around people being changed. And so the question I was thinking about today as we jump into this topic of discipleship, because that's really in the conversations that we have with leaders that we're working with, different churches that we're connected to, that's really at the heart of what we want to be the kind of engine that pushes our ministry forward. And the question I was thinking about even today is, if I walked into your ministry on a Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and pointed out a person and said, I want you to describe what is happening to that person, what would you say? Would you begin to be able to describe the things of not just the things that they're doing? That person's a leader, that person leads worship, that person is on the events team, but would you begin to describe what they're becoming? And because that's really the question for us as leaders, is can we begin to understand at deeper levels what is happening in the lives of individual students and young adults? And for most of us, that's a little bit harder of a task than we like to admit. But here's what we begin to think about as we think about ministry: is Jesus really could answer that question, right? And in ways even that for a lot of us, we don't do a good job of beginning to understand the depths and what is going on with people. And so everybody, when we talk to them, everybody would say that their mission is to make disciples. Their mission is to invest in the lives of leaders or college students or young adults. But it's interesting that nobody really can describe what that looks like. So I was thinking about this today, is that there's several different exercises that we want to help our leaders walk through that will help them understand what is the bullseye, what is the win, not for the ministry as a whole, but even for the individuals. And I asked this question with a group of leaders last week. I said, what would be the qualities and characteristics that you'd want to be true by the time that a young adult or a college student leaves your ministry? What would you want to be true? A lot of times what we find is the leaders can't really describe that, right? And if you ask a leader, often you'll get one of three kind of things, right? So you ask them, okay, what is discipleship? What does discipleship look like for you? And you'll hear them quote like some type of Bible verse, like Matthew chapter 28, right? Go and make disciples. Yes, okay. Or they'll begin to describe a model or a vehicle that they're utilizing. We use this curriculum, we use life groups, right? So, or what they do is they list a group, kind of a list of activities, right? They serve, they read the Bible, they show up. So things that a person does that really is the fruit of discipleship, but often we would describe when I kind of press down with leaders, they'll say, well, it's this is what the Bible says, or this is what the curriculum you use, or this is what people will do when it happens. This idea of making disciples, which is absolutely true, is the mandate, right? That we often will never question, but very rarely will we ever define it. So often, what that defaults to is that we can default to simply just measuring activities is because what we can see, right? So discipleship is showing up on Tuesday nights. Discipleship is them being involved in a group. The harder part is when you're leading towards a picture that we've never defined for people. And so when we're trying to communicate that to our leaders, it becomes fuzzy, and we pass along kind of this like muddled definition of what we mean by discipleship. And this is so common in the conversations. In fact, one of these, the discipleship conversation, is one of the primary conversations that I'll have with leaders as we begin to diagnose their ministries. And so in our coaching, often we can think about conversations around strategy, but really there's some kind of like pre-work that needs to be done before we get into that. And so what I want to begin to do today for a few minutes is actually look at a passage in John chapter 17. I want to kind of dissect John chapter 17. One of the passages that we'll use as we're looking at what Jesus' desire is for both the believers that were around him, but also in that prayer in John chapter 17 is the future believer. So, in John chapter 17, he's literally hours before going to the cross. He's in this spot where he is praying. I always tell this when I preach John chapter 17 is that we get the glimpse of some of the things as Jesus recognizes the moment. We get a glimpse of some of the most important things that he wants to say in this prayer. And this is not a curriculum. It's not a process. What he's communicating is really his heart to the Father. And what I want to do is I want to talk about just some things in John chapter 17 that would help us begin to understand what discipleship looks like through the prayer of Jesus. And so the first thing is that he, in the prayer, he talks about them belonging. We see this in verse 6. We see this in verse 9, where it says, they were yours and you gave them to me. Right? So it opens up in John chapter 17 with whose they are, not accomplishments, not progress, not the things they've done, but it's really this idea that identity comes before activity. So the identity of who the people that the Father had entrusted him were his. And so before they had done anything, there was an identity of these people are mine. And almost every definition that we build actually starts the opposite way, right? It doesn't start from a place of identity. It actually starts from a place of activity. And so what does it look like as we think about discipleship of belonging? Secondly, in John chapter 17, we see that they know the Father. We see this in a couple different sections of it, verse 7 and 8, and then again in 25 and 26, where they have come to know you. And this is not like an intellectual knowledge, it's a depth of relationship, that it's a level of understanding heart to heart. And this is so critical in terms of what discipleship is not just identity, but a relational connection, a heart-to-heart connection with the Trinity. And we see this in John chapter 17. So they know the Father. Thirdly, we see that they have joy. The response, kind of the outflow of that, is that they have joy. You see this in verse 13, that they may have my joy fulfilled in them. Right? So Jesus puts joy inside the definition of that relationship. And I just want to just pause here And if our definitions of discipleship don't have joy in them, if they're all like discipline and obligation and pressure, like, I really believe that that's not the heart of what Jesus is inviting us to. What Jesus is inviting us is a relationship. And then in that relationship, there is a joy that is an outflow. It's a delight, not a duty. And this is Jesus saying this in his own prayer. So thirdly is that they would have his joy. But it's interesting as Jesus kind of pivots in this is that we see this idea that of unity and mission, that they are one and they are sent. We see this in 18, 21, 23, where he talks about this idea as you have sent me into the world, so that I am sending them into the world, so that the world may believe. And this idea of like union and mission in the same breath of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And I just want to like highlight this because I think a lot of times in our definitions of discipleship, we make it very individual, right? That it's like my quiet time and the things that I do individually. But Jesus talks about this unity, this communion, both that we've been invited into in the Trinity, but also the unity and communion that we have with other believers, and the outflow of that collectively together is that it causes mission, right? So it doesn't stop with us individually, but runs through us together and then outward, that the world may see and experience. And then the landing of that, what he says in verse 26 is the love, that the love which you have loved me may be in them and I might be in them. And that's the definition, right? The love that the Father has for the Son, that same love that we are invited and get to experience that love as well. And so that is, we see the grace of that. We see the joy, we see the invitation of what we get to experience. So I think, Ben, if you haven't set like a definition of what discipleship really is, I think, man, take some time and study John chapter 17. I think John chapter 17 is this heart of Jesus, of his desire for his followers. And then he talks about in kind of the third, it's broken into kind of three sections. And the third section is really the heart for the not yet believer, for you and for me. And so one of the tools that we'll use when we think about helping develop, evaluate internally kind of where people are at, is using this tool called Head, Heart, Hands. Okay. And so what I want to do is kind of just show you a little bit about what it looks like, and some ways in which you can begin to create even some definitions using these three different things. One of the activities that we do is defining your perfect disciple, right? What would it look like for somebody once they graduate? And often we'll use these head, heart, hands as kind of an anchoring question. And I want to run through this because we see this even in John chapter 17. So you think about head, right? So now the challenge is when we think about head, I don't want you necessarily to think about like what they can articulate, what they can recall doctrinally, but think about this idea of knowing, being like known, be like, do we understand the gospel? Do we understand who Jesus is? Not in a like a scripted doctrinal recall, right? But do we have a connection with the Father and understand who Jesus is, what he's done? And so I think the head piece, and we see this in 7 and 8 and 25 in John chapter 17, is it's not just knowing about somebody, but it's actually knowing a person. Okay, so head. Secondly, is in the framework is heart. And so often we need to be careful when we talk about heart because we're not talking about like devoted to what we see in them, how much passion they have. But this really, here's the question: is what are they becoming? What are they coming to love? Right? Where are their affections? Not just their enthusiasm. Where are their infections? Affections? Where are they moving towards? What do they delight in that maybe they didn't a couple years ago? What do they care about now that maybe they begin to walk right past? I talk about this idea of like really part of discipleship is the uncurving of selfishness of the way in which we used to live, right? So we think about this idea of the transformation of our heart. And the last one is we talk about this hands, so head, heart, and hands. Now, what we don't want to do is drift into just like a task list of serving, attending, volunteering, filling certain things. But what we see in hands is open-handedness with um, our hearts being motivated into responsiveness. Like, what do we do because our hearts are so stirred of using our gifts, using our abilities because of that outflow? Remember that we're a conduit of the love that we experience from the Trinity, not just a reservoir that collects things, right? It should be flowing through us. And so I'd encourage you, even as you're thinking about either like an evaluation tool for your leaders. Head, Heart, Hands is a great one. We use this to kind of like make sure as we're defining what a disciple is and what discipleship looks like is making sure that we're balanced or that there's kind of areas in each of these. And because here's what I want to encourage us to do is, man, work hard at building what that definition is. A couple stories, and then I got a couple questions here for us, and then we'll keep moving here on this Monday. And so I remember two specific stories. One conversation I had with a leader in Florida where he came in asking this question about, man, I feel like I need to build a leadership pipeline. Right. So he's kind of, that's where he felt like he was stuck in the problem. But as we began to unpack his conversation, one of the things I began to kind of help him realize was, man, if you can't define a disciple, what does a disciple look like? You can't have a strategy that is going to help you walk alongside students to see that come about, that limits and caps a vision to see more of that happen on your campuses and in your city. So then why are you worried about systems? Right? So often what we're doing is we're asking questions that if we would actually take the time and build some of the kind of previous steps, that it actually creates some momentum and fruit. So here's a second one. I was talking to another leader in Wisconsin. And so he was, as we kind of talked about discipleship, his students and his leaders were defining discipleship as facilitating curriculum, right? So leaders then would think that they're not qualified because they didn't have the ability to lead effectively through that curriculum. And so what that was actually producing was a cap on the entire ministry, where he wasn't able to call those leaders to discipleship because in their mind, discipleship was equal to the building out of this curriculum. So there's a cost to not having a clear definition of what discipleship is. And so we can have a great program, ministries that are busy, calendars that are full, but the question really is what are we building people towards? And have we been able to create a picture of that and then describe that picture for them? So a couple things to just sit with here. I did this last week. I would encourage you to take a few minutes and do some reflection either today or when you're watching this. So here's the first thing is to come up with a picture. Think of a person that you're actually leading, that you want to disciple. Describe what's happening in them without naming something that they're doing. Right? So take some time and look at internally, what is the Lord doing in their life, not externally, what are the things that they're doing. Then I want you to utilize the head, heart, hands and see, as you're beginning to analyze them, which do you think is the thinnest in terms of their understanding of what it means to follow Christ in that way. And then really the next one is beginning to ask the question, what does it look like to lead them in that? And so I'd encourage you, head, heart, hands, incredible framework. I want to make sure, that, and this is the conversation over the last couple of weeks, and that we're going to continue to talk. In fact, on Thursday, if you're watching this before Thursday, uh, either the replay or live, we're going to be talking about this in a deeper way. What does it look like for us to measure uh, the appropriate things in our ministry? And so hopefully that was helpful. Define what a disciple looks like. What's your ideal disciple? Utilize the head, heart, hands framework, which is super valuable to a lot of our leaders. Okay. I think that's it for today. As usual, we're cheering a lot of you on. I know for many of you, if you're watching this week, lots of campus stuff is happening. Campuses are open up. Students are coming back, move in, welcome week, events, all these different things are happening, which is super fun. And we love being a part of supporting and helping leaders. So if you need something along the way, we'd love to pray for you, resource you, help you in any way we can. If not, we will catch you next Monday. Okay, we'll talk to you later.